And start.
Hey guys, I'm McLean Dries.
I'm Stella Kaminsky.
I'm Hannah Hertzberg.
And I'm Matthew Lloyd.
And the city we chose to explore was New Orleans, Louisiana. So this map right here, you can kind of look at in more detail, is just points of cultural significance in New Orleans that we'll look at further in the story map.
So outside of these like tangible locations in New Orleans, there's also a lot to be known about New Orleans intangible culture, and that's because it was originally founded by French settlers, and then it welcomed a lot of Spaniards, and so that's seen a lot through its architecture, and it's just culture with music, cuisine, and its annual celebrations like Mardi Gras and Three Kings Day, and that's just something I'm going to go into further detail with my TDR, which is explaining Ferguson through place and race. This discussion focuses a lot on the interplay between place, race, and social outcomes, which is super applicable to New Orleans racial dynamics that's been shaped a lot through physical locations and injustice and tangible culture. So on this map, you'll see a lot of the neighborhoods within New Orleans, and there's a lot to be said about how these neighborhoods have shaped the interconnectedness of race and social outcomes. So one neighborhood in particular is the French Quarter. This is the oldest neighborhood in New Orleans. It was, the first colonized area by the French. It's the center of economic and social life. And on a darker note, it was known for hosting, the largest slave trade in the nation. There was the St. Louis Hotel that has since been taken down, but it still has a lot of areas that commemorate. I mean, not commemorate, but show the history of slavery, such as the Jackson Square, which is named after our former president Andrew Jackson. But now this area does have it's a center for art and for palm readers and horse carriages and street performances. So we've seen like this French Quarter now become a major tourist destination, and it celebrates a lot of the historic architecture and vibrant culture, but it does serve as a reminder of its complex past. Another neighborhood is the Trem neighborhood. This is the oldest African-American neighborhood in the city. As you saw on the map above, it is not located on the Mississippi River. The reason why the French Quarter was on the Mississippi River was because it was easy access for the slave trade. This neighborhood, on the other hand, was where a lot of Black and African-American folks lived. This is seen in the Congo Square. It served as an area for enslaved African-Americans to gather and celebrate live music and dancing, and it still serves that purpose today. It now rests in the Louis Armstrong Park, and I wanted to touch that it's an interesting parallel between two significant culture molding social groups, because areas like the French Quarter and art districts were both predominantly white neighborhoods with these huge public spaces and monuments that are well funded, and that shows a lot of the culture that's celebrating white heroes. They're named after Lafayette and Andrew Jackson. And then the Black neighborhood Trem has a public park commemorating a jazz artist. And so it serves an equally significant role in shaping New Orleans culture. However, it's less frequented by tourists. You can see the lack of attention in the public spaces and the building upkeep. Popular tourist destinations are marked for having authentic Creole Drive music, food, festivals, and atmospheres. However, they are profiting off a culture that was originally Spanish and French colonies that brought slaves to Louisiana. So a lot of those Creole traditions we know today are adaptations that come from the African American community. So that was an interesting parallel. I hope I explained that well, but I mean, you'll just see here with the art district, this was like the wealthiest white neighborhood at one point, and it still has some well-preserved mansions that were, they were originally plantations, and now they're just huge mansions that are converted into bed and breakfast and wedding venues and museums. And even now there's like Sandra Bullock has a house there, but also like Jay-Z and Beyonce have a house there. So that's interesting to take note of. And how this it relates to my FDR with the Ferguson Missouri is Ferguson. I shouldn't be laughing, but Ferguson, this was the case of Michael Brown, an 18-year-old who was shot by a white police officer, Darian Wilson. And the community struggled with a lot of racial inequality and economic segregation. They couldn't get past this event that happened, and it still has caused a lot of community uproar in the surrounding areas of St. Louis. And New Orleans was once the slave trade capital, and now it has a majority Black population, and the presence of the Black and African population is a testament to their resilience and cultural contributions to these communities, despite all the challenges they have faced. And so there's a lot of similarity there. And I'm sorry, Matt, can you scroll up a little? I had one quote that I want to touch on. And I noted, I said here that New Orleans distraction is very similar to Ferguson's turmoil. Both areas must notice the underlying cause, the growth of concentrated poverty in the suburbs. Not only are the suburban poor isolated from opportunity, but the central city is poor, and they face weak governmental and civic institutions that deepen their disadvantage. As I mentioned, these predominantly white neighborhoods that have been white for decades are thriving off tourism and their well-kept public spaces. And then you look at a historically Black community like Trem that doesn't have the same funding, and they are at a disadvantage. However, they're thriving with a unique history and culture. And that's all I had to say.
All right, so my TDR was residential income segregation. And overall in America, there has been growth in both poor and affluent neighborhoods, but fewer people are living in neighborhoods with mixed income or median income. This is largely due to growing income and wealth disparity, which has caused income segregation that's been taking a toll in neighborhoods and districts. A downside of this is that affluent individuals are increasingly isolated from the poor economically as well as geographically, which the geographic isolation makes the disparity between the poor and wealthy much larger. On the left, there's a HOLC redlining grade map, which shows where redlining was previously instated. And if you do if you look closer at the map, you'll notice that the neighborhood that Stella touched on, Tremy, is still marked in red. And that just goes to show how the cultural history of New Orleans has still kept up today. And the neighborhoods such as the Garden Historic District and Tremy are both kind of in similar places that they were in the past. And New Orleans, the conversation about residential income segregation cannot just stop at income segregated neighborhoods, but it fully involves racially segregated neighborhoods as well. As of 2021, Black households had a median income that was 64% less than white households, and which is a very large difference. And Black incomes in New Orleans are not only well below just white incomes in New Orleans, they're also below incomes of Black households in other pure metros such as Houston, Orlando, Atlanta, and Charlotte, which also have very high Black populations. And Black households in New Orleans also had the highest household income gap of 48% compared to these cities, but New Orleans does have the higher percentage of Black people compared to white people than those other cities. So that just goes to show how bad the income gap is, particularly in New Orleans. Additionally, homeownership remains out of reach for majority of New Orleans households that are non-white. Only 43% of African American households and 33% of Latino households own their own homes, compared to 54% of white or Asian households. And although Asian American households have roughly the same rate of homeownership as white households, there is a major gap in property values between these two. So New Orleans does have such a rich history, but unfortunately, since that history included racism and segregation, that has continued to persist in residential areas today. And like I said, neighborhoods that were primarily Black or low income in the late 1800s are still separated from predominantly white and affluent neighborhoods. And this fiscal and physical separation will continue unless action is taken, such as raising the wages of Black employees in New Orleans that will decrease income disparity overall.
Okay, then my TDR, I focused on neighborhood gentrification in New Orleans. So looking at this map here on the left, it shows the, I guess, subdivided groups of the population, where a lot of the color shows how the Black community is usually in some areas of the neighborhood, and then the tend to be white population are in completely different areas, as you can see with like the tannish colored dots and the yellowish colored dots. And then I found it interesting comparing neighborhood gentrification to the cause of what Hurricane Katrina did to the area. And with this map here on the right, you can see the different flood levels in some of the areas. And when you combine the flooding with the race and ethnicity of the individuals living in the different neighborhoods, you can see that where there was the least amount of flooding is where the majority of the white population resides. And due to the geography and the general makeup of the land, some areas were affected more than others, allowing those with more money and that they had the ability to move to different sections to the less damaged areas, since they were able, and lower income individuals were not able to, so they tend to reside in the more impacted areas. And even though Hurricane Katrina was a big factor in impacting the gentrification of New Orleans, it was still going on for quite some time beforehand, even though that's just what kind of brought it to attention. As you can see here, like some of the statistics say that renters were burdened with severe housing costs at 23%. Then after, and that was in 2000, then after in 2022, it had still increased to 35%. So that just shows like the difference is in between the time periods. And then still in 2020, New Orleans ranked 5th out of 20 in the nation's most gentrified cities, which I found kind of interesting. Then one of the neighborhoods I wanted to focus on was the neighborhood of Bywater. It has a lot of cultural heritage from all the different settlers that settled there, and making a very big like melting pot of different cultures. It's very different with some of it, the way the neighborhood is split up, because some of it was greatly affected by the hurricane, but then some of the other areas were not. So the portion of the neighborhood that was not quite as affected is called the Silver by the River. That's what they tend to refer it as it's just that special place that was still full of the culture that was there beforehand, all of the flooding and destruction. So previously, before all of the destruction and stuff, it was majority Black, but with the rising prices, most of the people that couldn't live anymore, they couldn't live there anymore. And as you can see with these statistics, such as there was 74% of the neighborhood was Black, but then in 2020, the number had dropped to 37%, as these people couldn't really afford to live in the area anymore, and they were forced to go elsewhere. Another thing that is greatly impacting this too is the tourism in the area. When people go and they stay in Airbnbs, and that kind of takes away housing of the people that live there. So it's kind of forcing them out, and there's been a lot of backlash throughout the neighborhood. Yeah, and it kind of creates more of a visitor-friendly version of the neighborhood that kind of leaves out a lot of the culture where the residents are feeling that it doesn't fully represent what they're living in.
Okay. So that leads us into the barriers and breaking factors. So as was stated before, gentrification occurs mostly in the areas with existing economic disparities. So the fact that there have been there's many factors that led up to this, such as Hurricane Katrina, which displaced many people living in poor situations. That displaced them, and it led them to not be able to build on their property again, which led to investors kind of taking advantage of these poorer areas and turning them into kind of like tourist spots and raising the prices of these homes for their advantage. And neighborhoods affected by gentrification post the storm are due to the fact that they not flood as badly during Hurricane Katrina, and post storm these became hot spots, even though previously they've not been historically undervalued and majority Black, as stated in this passage right here. And then after Hurricane Katrina, it opened the door, like I just said, for people to claim properties that were decimated, not even completely gone, just kind of, or the ones that were not completely gone were taken advantage of, but the properties that were decimated were completely taken advantage of. And then this led many families that lived in New Orleans to be displaced because they've been bought out by property developers seeking to raise the price in the area, causing gentrification. And so the focus was not replacing the homes of those who were lost, which would have preserved cultural heritage, but to boost the economy by giving these investors the properties and whatnot to build whatever they saw fit at the time. And opportunities that might create positive patterns would be that to benefit the residents of New Orleans, and in wake of this would be government-sponsored housing programs, which would prevent investors to raise the prices of the New Orleans area homes and not displace people, which led me to my TDR, which was the move up or move out TDR, which talked about how in many different metropolitan areas there are areas where where gentrification caused either people to move up and gain wealth to support the raising prices of the area, or to move out and be displaced from their own home. And so like these opportunities could help like the government sponsored affordable housing programs could allow people to be able to own their property and manage their own property without outside influence. And that also plays into mixed income development, like a mixed income development and privately owned property initiative, where both privately owned and government owned property could be intermingled, which would support the people that would not be able, not only people that would not be able to afford the home they live in, but for people that would like to develop in New Orleans. And then here's the housing values in New Orleans, talking about the raise in price and compared to, and these prices are high compared to what they used to be in previous years. Okay.
And then some of the opportunities for bringing the neighborhoods together that we went over was getting the residents to engage and participate within the community to make sure everyone's represented. And then one of the other proposed factors was that would help the community a lot was mixed use development. It would allow for diverse neighborhoods to meet the needs of different income classes. And for example, it could allow for more affordable housing, which is crucial within the growth of New Orleans, as it would give more people areas to live instead of having to leave. And within the community of New Orleans, it's such a unique area that preserving the area's cultural identity and heritage is important. So being able to keep all the diverse backgrounds is very important in the community, and that could be strengthened by supporting like local businesses or cultural institutions.
Okay, and then that leads into the skills and strategies for building belonging, and kind of building onto the DTR I was talking about of moving up or moving out. One of the key factors that I was looking into was the fact that to kind of build this connection with the people of New Orleans and to kind of or help prevent gentrification and the disparity of people would be different programs such as to create equitable spaces that would give power for the people to grow together in uniform and to kind of build a sense of community even after like great events such as Hurricane Katrina or like big storms that could hurt the community. Having these record. Oh shit! All right, it's recording.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Recording now. Okay. All right, so moving on to skills and strategies for building and belonging. So going into my DTR about moving up or moving out, that goes into mainly into the gentrification side of things, and Hurricane Katrina as a whole kind of create a large disparity among homes that have been previously or reclaimed by previous owners. And one thing that would create kind of a benefit for the community of New Orleans, whether it be the culture, whether it be the African American community, whether it be local residents of New Orleans itself, I feel like the equitable spaces where people can grow and as a community would benefit communication, and say another storm or like Hurricane Katrina, still the aftermath after that, building upon that would benefit the people, and creating a sense of community would kind of build these new relationships with the people in New Orleans, and would forge projects and decision-based plans inside of the city itself. And building upon that, what was mentioned about community building and a skill and strategy that could be implemented is mutual support among residents, and that kind of builds on like what I said about community building. And if the New Orleans residents supported each other and respected boundaries regarding homes and property and gentrification and displacement as a whole, there would be less problems with, like I said, gentrification and the raising of housing prices, which is has a negative effect on all the residents of New Orleans. And moving on to the last paragraph, in order to resolve these negative patterns because of neighborhood gentrification to build belonging, is also very important to recognize cultures and what they have to offer within the New Orleans area. It's important to bring these regions together based on culture previously represented there. And what it says, like, for example, residents can advocate for environments that reflect cultural identity and values of community through local art, music, traditions, and history. And that goes into kind of like the community aspect, as I mentioned before. And this also focuses on limiting gentrification and can lead residents to help the future of their own neighborhoods, and to kind of enact like their own policy to limit the raising of housing prices and to build a better community for the New Orleans people themselves, and throughout, and which could possibly spread through the entire nation. Sorry. All right. And then here are our sources right here. And we're good. Wait.